Hey guys, AirsoftPost here, another Q&A video. This question is related to rails and rings and mounts and stuff like that. Are they universal? Which one should I buy? What should I look out for? And in the question specifically, are all rail systems universal? The short answer is no. There are three main types of rail you're going to have to worry about: the Picatinny, the Weaver, and the Dovetail. Picatinny and Weaver are the ones you're going to come across most often. For example, these are some just regular medium mount Weaver scope rings. Now, Weaver and Picatinny is actually the military standard, but I, for some reason, have just come across more Weaver accessories than Picatinny. The main difference is the width is exactly the same. When we're talking about width, we mean, basically the distance between here. So if you're looking at a piece of rail here, this is just an M16 carry handle mount. I highly recommend it. If you were looking at the width here, this would be indistinguishable from Picatinny versus Weaver. But the main difference is these little grooves cut in here, and what these allow you to do is basically have these little humps here in this bottom of this ring right there. You're going to choose one of these notches, and it's going to seat it in there, and it's going to hold it very steady. Now, the Picatinny's notches are actually a little bit wider than the Weaver notches, just by the standardization of the platform. It's only a few hundredths of an inch. It's very insignificant to the naked eye, but it makes a big difference when you're working with precision milled aluminum and steel. So everything Weaver is going to go nicely into a Picatinny mount for the most part, but a lot of Picatinny accessories will not work in Weaver mounts, so that's just something to watch out for. But it's really, it hasn't been an issue for me. I bought maybe 10 or 11 mounts that I wasn't even really sure if they were Picatinny or Weaver at the time I bought them, and I've never run across a compatibility problem. The other thing that I think it's important to recognize about scope rings is that you need to know the scope rings for the job you're going to be doing. These are standard mount scope rings. I had these on an XM8 spring rifle. They worked perfectly. They're right at eye level. But I have an MK12, which looks a lot like an M16. That gun has a rail running all the way across the top of the receiver. I had a cheek pad on the butt that I like to rest my cheek on in order to shoot more comfortably. However, what I realized is that with these regular mount rings on my Powerline scope here, I wasn't getting the height on the scope I needed to look through properly. So what I did is I went online and I bought these 1-inch high mount scope rings, and you can pretty clearly see the difference here when you put them next to each other. It's just a little higher. Now what that allowed me to do is get a little bit more rise on my scope so I could look much more accurately through it. It did phenomenal work in terms of making my scope easier and more comfortable to use. And now I have this, this Powerline scope mounted up with those high mount rings because it goes on my MK12. So it's important to realize that some applications you're going to want that high mount, some you're going to want it to be a little more down low. Also, it depends a little bit on personal preference. The third rail standard that I mentioned, Dovetail, it's not something I run across a lot in the world of airsoft, but it is worth mentioning. You can see immediately the thing you notice about the Dovetail is that it's significantly smaller in terms of the width of the bracket here on these rings. If you just take a Weaver mount and you put them up next to each other, it's fairly obvious almost right away. Now the reason for this is because you can have a much thinner rail with these Dovetail mounts. For example, I have a Gammo air rifle. It's a precision air rifle, and I know that it has only Dovetail mounts on the top. So I have these Dovetail rings that I got actually with this Powerline scope, and now I mount this smaller Leapers mil-dot scope on my Gammo, just for some target practice. And this proves another point about most of these scope rings, is that they're 1-inch scope rings. They're pretty much standardized in terms of scopes to rings. Scopes and rings often will come together, but you need to really differentiate between the two. These are not fused together. If I undid these Allen keys here, these would come right off, and they do. I change them all the time. So if I were actually a sharpshooter, I was serious about riflery, I'd be boring out these, and fitting the scope rings to the scope can actually get pretty complicated if you're very serious about accuracy and you're using a very nice precision-made scope. Nothing on this table costs me more than $50, so I'm not too terribly worried about any of it. So basically, I'm just swapping these rings all the time, depending on which one I need. I have my high mount Weaver, I have my Dovetail, and I have my regular mount Weaver, and whatever I need for the job, it's 5 minutes switch up. I also have this little UTG flashlight here with this momentary switch. I recommend it also because it's a fantastic little light. I also bring it out because it allows you to see that not all rail brackets are little scope rings. This is, about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of rail attachment here, and it's got 2 little screws that you can turn with your finger, and basically what you would just do is just screw them out until they were wide enough to basically claw onto your rail here. not that complicated, pretty simple, and it proves very effectively that you can have rails of different widths. Once this screws on, we're not necessarily as concerned here about direct accuracy. This is a flashlight after all, but that's not going anywhere. That's very solid. So oftentimes rails aren't about rings. They're really about accessories, and that's why you have rail attachment systems and rail integration systems, is because you can have red dot sights, flashlights, all kinds of cool stuff on your gun using these standardizations. So my basic advice here, just to summarize, is that really don't worry too much about dovetails if you're only doing airsoft, because I really have not personally come across a dovetail mount in all my airsoft experience. Go for Weaver or Picatinny rails. There may be a time where you run across a conflict there, but I have never personally run across one, so I wouldn't really worry too much about it. I hope this video was informative, and please keep your questions coming. Thanks for watching.